Father, Son, and Holy Guest, episode number 6. So, I'm Wright Culpepper. I'm the father in this show.
I'm Bill Culpepper. I'm the son. And Dad, what do you know about chaplaincy?
Well, Bill, I've been doing chaplaincy for the past 25 years in the hospital setting, and never thought of myself as a chaplain before getting into that. And that's a long story about how I got into it, but I have found it to be a tremendous blessing to me, because in the hospital setting, on the local hospital setting, I get to meet everybody. I get to serve and work with pastors from other denominations and other churches and other religions, get called into birth and death situations and everything in between, some chronic and some emergency. And so you really get a broad experience in life. So chaplaincy has been very rich for me, and also served as a springboard to a lot of the other ministries that come from FaithWorks, in terms of our healthcare and poverty-related ministries, because in chaplaincy, you're kind of a presence and a listening presence, and you start hearing stories, and you realize you hear the same story over and over again, and you begin to say, well, maybe God's leading me to try to address that issue. And so many of the ministries of FaithWorks have come out of the chaplain setting. And you helped me at the Southeast Georgia Health System by serving as one of the staff chaplains there. Tell me your experience.
Yeah, I never really considered chaplaincy either as a path for me. I've always been more of a teaching or maybe student kind of ministry. There were times when I was looking at school chaplaincy for a college or a private school or something like that. But the hospital ministry has been something that I've had to grow into. Watching someone pass away is not always the easiest thing, even if you're coming in as someone completely neutral to the situation. And that's one of the reasons why we get called into those situations, I think, is because we are more or less neutral, and they're looking for someone who can be present, but not all caught up in the whirlwind of what's happening in that room.
Yeah, you're right. And I have discovered that death is a very, very holy experience, certainly very traumatic on the family, but to be in the presence of someone as they breathe their last breath here, and in my faith, breathe their next breath in the presence of God. And you can see the tension go away. You can see peace come to the face. It's very, very holy experience that not an awful lot of people in our day and age get to experience unless you are working in healthcare. Back in my parents' generation, very often people died at home. And now with hospice, people do get that experience a little bit more of being in the presence of someone who's a loved one that's dying. But it's a holy, holy, holy experience. There are military chaplains all over the world. Do you ever consider anything related to military in your journey?
No, I knew a guy at seminary who was planning to go into military chaplaincy, but his path ended up changing. And then I've known a guy who has been a military chaplain for the most of his career. And today we're talking to someone who is a career military chaplain.
The military, I grew up in the Vietnam War, and I was pretty much a pacifist. Did not want to go. I wasn't involved in the politics of all of that. It's just that weighed heavily on my heart. And my dad was a Navy guy in career Naval Reserve, and there was some talk about me maybe going to one of the military academies. And I was thinking, well, maybe if I've got to go in military, it might be Coast Guard, but I was really trying to do everything I could do to not be military. And then Vietnam War ended, and I was the first group, my class was the first group that did not have to register for the draft. There was a period in time there where people did not have to register. So it didn't even become an issue with me. But I've got a number of friends, Matt Woodbury, who was in Washington with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now he's in Germany with NATO. Number of friends, Rob Crawford, that we're talking to today, that went into military chaplaincy, and I've got high regard for them.
Well, let's talk to Rob.
All right, we're glad to have Lieutenant Colonel Rob Crawford with us all the way from Germany today on this episode of Father, Son, and Holy Guest. Rob has been a career chaplain with the Army Reserve and has spent most of his career in Germany. Rob, welcome. We're glad to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Wright. Thanks, Bill. I'm delighted to be with you. It's wonderful to hear familiar voices from back home.
Well, it's good to have you. And you kind of wear or carry a dual role. You've got a knapsack, I guess, with all of your military in it, but you've got an extra pocket in it with your Bible, I guess. And so you answer to two authorities, the United States Army Reserve and to the United Methodist Church, I believe. Tell us a little bit about your journey and all of that, and how you have lived out your faith through Army chaplaincy.
Well, I'm a native Georgian. I was born in DeKalb General Hospital, one of the early babies there, and I grew up in Madison, about 30 miles south of Athens. Now it's on Interstate 20, and grew up in the Methodist Church there. Spent a year at Furman learning about the Baptist faith, and actually get some really good experience. Wound up coming back to Georgia, learned about being a bulldog, and then felt that call to ministry kind of early on, and wound up at Candler. And I think you and I may have been there at the same time. I'm not exactly sure, but we were pretty close.
Sure.
And immediately went to the North Georgia Conference, and had this wonderful church out on Lake Oconee right after the lake was flooded, and it went full time, and that was a nice experience. I was there for about 7 or 8 years. Then the conference sent me to Atlanta to start a new church, and boy, that was a challenge up in Cobb County, because that's a place where there's a lot of churches. And I think your cousin was up there about that time.
Absolutely.
And, yeah, a lot of Baptists up there, and and then had the opportunity to serve on the conference staff for a couple of years, and went back to the local church. And at some point, though, I got this real call to be in ministry with younger people. And one of my friends, Jim Higgins, said, "Hey, well, I'm doing this." Said, "You get to come one Sunday a month, one weekend a month, and play Army." And I go, "Oh, that sounds like fun." And so I joined. Next thing I knew, I was in Iraq. I thought, I didn't sign up for this. It turned out to be the best year of my life. And I really felt like God was calling me, to something a little bit different. And it's a wonderful place to do ministry. It's a very pluralistic, ecumenical, challenging place. It's where it truly is the world is our mission. The world is our parish. It's an amazing place to be with people in a very real environment, and the opportunities are pretty much unlimited here.
Can you talk a little bit about what chaplaincy does, maybe on a regular basis? I think some people probably have an idea, but what do you do daily or weekly?
Yeah, well, the one thing that people often don't know is that we are clergy. Every chaplain has got to be endorsed by a major body, and that includes Christian and Jewish and imams. They're endorsing bodies, so you have to meet your credentials, which is a master's level. And some bodies don't have like an endorsed age, like the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons don't have an endorsing body. So most of those guys have masters in clinical psychology. So, but at the same time, they're operating out of a faith-based environment. And that's really what we do primarily is we advise the commanders on matters of religion, morale, and morality. So we try to make sure that the spirit is good with the troops. We have to make sure that policies are good. We exist to protect the First Amendment of soldiers. So my job is not necessarily to convert people, but to protect people. And sometimes that means, providing for them. Sometimes it means protecting them from things they don't want to be involved in. And mostly pastoral care. That's what I do a lot with. We do have worship, and especially here in Germany, because we don't all speak German, we have services on post in English, and those services are familiar, which you'd recognize in the States, the styles of worship. It is interesting because the chaplaincy is kind of divided into two groups. There are the Roman Catholic group, which includes the Orthodox, Roman Catholics. Anybody that has apostolic succession could actually be on that side, and although it's primarily Roman. And then the rest of us are clumped together in what's called general Protestant. That's everybody from Free Church to Episcopal, Lutheran. It is an interesting dynamic to do worship in a military community.
I would expect that that's kind of like a free-for-all almost, with just a wide, diverse group of people and theologies and practice of ministry. How do you plug in as a United Methodist with that diversity?
Yeah, that's a good question, because you look for common denominators. Obviously, you have to be faithful to your endorsement. And thank goodness the United Methodist Church is very clear in its direction and policy, but it also gives us a lot of freedom. It's a blessing that we have an open table. So when we offer the sacrament of Holy Communion, not right now during COVID, that's not happening, but normally we have an open table, no issues. I preach sermons. I might quote John Wesley, but I'm not going to preach a strict, particular line. I'm going to try to stay with more general themes, and but never required to do anything that would violate my endorsement. And same thing for the other chaplains. And it's an interesting thing. It's like when I was in the local church, we'd have a Wednesday night. What would it be before Thanksgiving? We do one time a year ecumenical service, and it was fun. Well, we do that every day here. I've got two rabbis that work for me because we're so close to Israel. We have an imam in our community. We have at least two Roman Catholic priests. And so you get some wonderful dialogue going, and you get to talk about things and consider things and get perspective. It's a very, very interesting place to be.
You mentioned COVID. We're over here dealing with it stateside. You're dealing with it in Europe. How's it playing out for you over there?
We're doing pretty well. Italy really had it hard, and as you probably seen the news, and it was really bad. So that area was locked down. They're just beginning to come out. They were pretty strictly confined. We were probably like you. We were shut down. No haircuts. No tattoos. None of that kind of stuff. Only essential travel, essential going out. We can go 18 kilometers and that's it. There's a little bit of a lockdown, but it hadn't been that bad. The German churches actually started service again this weekend, and the interesting dynamic is church attendance in Germany is not quite what it is in America. So social distancing isn't as difficult for many services. They still can't do the sacrament in the Roman Church, and so that kind of slowed that down. But no singing, because they're worried about the virus being respirated, through the stuff. So for right now in Germany, we can't sing in public. Only in the shower. You
can drink beer, but you can't sing, right?
Exactly. It can go in, but it can't come out. That's the way it works.
Alcohol kills germs anyway, right?
That's right. Yeah. Keeps it clean. It is great to be here, though. If you haven't been to Germany, every Christian needs to take the opportunity. I lived for several years in Worms, and you probably know that from the Diet of Worms when Luther ate the worm. No, but where the court was when Luther was brought on trial. And there's just a lot of history. Europe is just you can't help but just stumble into something historical no matter where you go. There's something to see and something to do and something to talk about and something to remember.
Where are you currently stationed?
Go ahead, Bill.
Where are you currently stationed?
I'm in Kaiserslautern, which is in the southwestern part of Germany. Same state as Worms, not too far, about an hour and a half from Frankfurt, where the big airport is. When you fly to Europe, you'll probably come to Frankfurt.
I can remember.
We also have Ramstein Air Force Base here. That's what a lot of people would know that.
Right. I can remember back in seminary, it was kind of stated that theology kind of originates in Germany, and then it filters out to the rest of the world as we process that. And I guess that goes back somewhat to Luther's day, and you've got Bonhoeffer and others. How is it in Germany today? And
right, that I got to tell you a story. The Methodist Church is here. We have the EMK, the Evangelische Methodisten Kirche, and Rosemarie Venner was the bishop for a number of years, and we had just a great relationship. We would do our endorsing retreats. The UMEA, United Methodist Storage Agency, would come over, and all the chaplains that were stationed here, and Bishop Venner would join us. But so we established a relationship with the Methodist Church here, and it is part of the United Methodist Church. So these people and everything. So anyway, I went to the local church here in Kaiserslautern. They invited me to a Bible study, and we were going to talk about Luther. So I thought, well, they're a bunch of Methodists. They will probably be kind of amateurs, and so I got my book out and I boned up a little bit on Luther. Well, I'm so glad I did, because when they did Bible study, we sat down for 2.5 hours. I didn't eat dinner. I thought, well, they'll have some snacks or some coffee. There was nothing but 7 guys sitting there on our hands for 2.5, 3 hours discussing the life and the theology on Martin Luther that if I had been at Canberra, I would have been challenged. I mean, these guys were that good. It was an experience. I never underestimate the Germans. They are very, very detailed.
well, I do feel like that we all kind of get locked in our own little bubble, and we're down here in South Georgia, and we very often don't have an appreciation for the work that's being done in the rest of the world, and I look forward to you coming and sharing with us a little bit about Luther sometime down the line. So I want to shift gears a little bit, and that you have been talking kind of about your daily routine and what's kind of normal life, but I expect that you've been in some very difficult situations in your role as chaplain. You mentioned that you were in Iraq. You've served over in the Middle East. Tell us a little bit about your experience there.
Yeah. Well, I was fortunate. I was with some pretty good folks, and I wasn't with the initial invasion was pretty severe. And so by the time I got there, my first billet was on an Air Force base, and the Air Force, they live differently. You probably have some Air Force folks out there, and they know it's really a little bit different. But it was challenging. The 2 tours down there were different. It was good in that I got to see a different culture and meet people, and struggle with Arabic a little bit, and they struggled with English, and I learned a lot about how Christians and Arabs Christianity and Islam have a lot more in common than they do apart. That was a real surprise to me. I'd always thought of them being a very different culture, and we started talking about things. I was at Talil, which is the reputed next to Talil is the reputed where Abraham's from, and they've got a site and everything down there, and they knew an awful lot about Father Abraham, and found out we had a common ancestor. So that was an interesting experience. The most difficult year I had, though, was here in Germany. One of our units, the first Brigade Combat Team of the 1st Armored Division, went down in 2006 and retook some territory that we had lost, and we lost a lot of soldiers. That was a very important operation. They succeeded in their operation, but we wound up having to do what I consider the most difficult job in the chaplaincy, and that is the notification. Chaplain doesn't actually give the word. You usually have an NCO, a non-commissioned officer, an officer of the same rank who goes and tells the family, but somebody's got to stay with that family. That person comes in and tells them as much as they can, that we're so sorry we lost your family member. And then they leave, and then the chaplain is there until somebody else can arrive. And I've been there for a couple of hours with people, just trying to help them live through that chaotic time, structure their life, figure out what to do in those moments of just absolute grief. And yeah, it's an important ministry I would never delegate to anybody else. But if I never have to do another notification, it will be too soon.
Yeah, I understand that, and I appreciate that, and I expect that was a heavy volume too. It wasn't like just 1 or 2 people. You had to minister to a lot of grief.
Yeah, it's the same thing, I think, in a local church. You'll have the loss. There'll be a car accident and a young person gets killed. Kind of the same thing there. And then you've got a grieving family, and you've got the friends, and it's not the normal course of life. What do the philosophers say in normal life, sons bury their fathers, but in war, fathers bury their sons. And that's kind of where we were. And that was a really, really difficult time. But again, the military community is great in that it pulls together so tightly, and they do take care of each other.
Rob, what do you think a pastor's role is in helping somebody navigate grief like that?
Well, I think the idea is to help people find what's in them. I really believe that God gives us everything we need. It's with us. You know, God provides that. And our job is to help people figure it out and pull it out. What did somebody say years ago? That we're living human documents. And it's my job sort of to be the mirror to help you find inside of you what you need. And of course, to provide that non-anxious presence to kind of help with calming people down and kind of helping people figure out their best resources. That's really, I think, the role of the chaplain.
Non-anxious presence. I appreciate that line. That's a good line for what you do. I've been serving as a chaplain for 25 years now in hospital setting, and yes, I learned early on I could not be the one that delivered the news, because that rendered anything else I did after that ineffective.
Yeah, exactly.
Doctor comes in, gives the news, walks out, and then we try to offer that non-anxious presence. And it's really holy ground on which you stand when you do that. So I appreciate so much your ministry there.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a common ground. Thank goodness for Ed Friedman. I'm sure you probably read Generation to Generation a while back. And
yeah, Friedmans Fables is one of my best.
Oh yeah, oh I got it. Yeah, I use that.
Talk about who that is for people who don't know who that is.
Yeah, Ed was a rabbi back in I first encountered him back in the 1980s. I think he wrote his big work is called Generation to Generation. It's still in print by the Guilford Press. And later he wrote the Fables, which are fun. Those are really good teaching tools. Great for Sunday school. Great for small groups. They later put together his writings. He died in 1996, posthumously, called Leadership in the Age of Quick Fix. And but Friedman had been a student of Murray Bowen at the National Institutes of Health. Was a rabbi, but also a counselor who got into family process and approached family process from a systems idea. And anyway, long story short, a lot of good stuff. As a pastor, I found it to be very helpful, and as a chaplain, I found it to be extremely helpful. So even today, I still pull out Ed's books and continue to read and go back over. They're all dog-eared and highlighted, but just
I have the generation I think on my shelf. I've long lost my Friedman's Fables as I loaned it out to many, and I don't think it got back to me. I'll need to pick up a copy of that again.
Yeah, definitely a good read. Everybody could benefit from that one, you know, studying the triangles and the homeostasis and identified patient. It changes the way you see the world.
Rob, we end every interview with what we call the Holy Trinity. 3 questions that we ask all of our guests. And the first is, obviously, I see books behind you. That you probably are a man of many books. We live in a day and age where a lot of people listen to podcasts, which is kind of where I am. So we're curious. The first question in the Holy Trinity is, what are you reading or what are you listening to right now?
Wow. Yeah, I know. I knew you were going to ask me that. I'm not a linear kind of guy. I pick and choose and I read. I'm a very eclectic reader. I'm still rereading, actually going through Ed's Generation to Generation right now. I picked up a book over the weekend called Like War. And I don't know the title of the author, but it's out there. I'm sure I've got it on Kindle, and I'm sure it's available on podcast, and it's a recent publication. But it talks about the transformation of internet technology and how the internet's how it is like war, and how,
man, I tell you, it is.
Yeah, and how important it is, how we get our ideas out there, and it compares it to they give kind of a summary of history of communication going back to the internet may be the most important development since the alphabet, and they talk about the impact and how, Well, a big example would be the ISIS thing. You know, how they were able to use the internet to they were getting ready to attack Mosul, and Mosul had an army supposedly of 25,000 troops. In reality, they probably had an army of 10,000 troops, but there were only 1,500 ISIS guys. But the images they were able to put out on the internet, you know, hurting people and doing destruction, scared the 10,000 troops that were there, and overnight the army dissipated. They used the internet very effectively in that way the first time, and really an amazing thing for propaganda. So that was just one example that really caught my eye as I was reading. I go, wow, you know, we need to be more aware.
You know, I did not know that. I remember that happening, and they just being completely overrun. I didn't know the story about the use of the internet in strategy. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Very intentional use of the internet.
So that book is Like War.
It's called Like War.
Okay.
The other book I'm reading that I just can't put down is, I was at my parents' house, and I think I had bought this one back in the 80s. Barbara Tuchman. Barbara Tuchman was a great writer of history. She wrote The Guns of August is her most famous work, I think. But then she wrote one later called The Proud Tower, and of course that title comes from Edgar Allan Poe's poem. But it's about the Gilded Age, the period just before World War I. And as you look at the shape of things in the world today, you look at how divided the country is and everything right now, and she does a wonderful job of describing an incident in French history called the Dreyfus Affair. And it talks about a period in the late 1880s, early 1890s, when France was so divided. And it says, oh my goodness, it sounds so much like where the United States seems to be right now. And it was very interesting, kind of a case study for where we are as a church, as a country, as a culture.
And that's Barbara
Tuchman, Tuchman, I believe.
Second question we have is there any book of the Bible or verse or story that you feel like has really informed either your daily life or in your work?
Well, we're coming out of Easter, and I just can't help but go back to the story of my own conversion. And that goes back to Luke chapter 24, the Emmaus Road story. I remember as a young person, I was always so disappointed that I didn't have a Damascus Road story, some dramatic conversion experience, because I'd grown up in the church, and I'd always went to church. Even when I went to college, I went to church. You know, a lot of my friends would sleep in, and I'd wake up, got to go to church. And so I didn't realize that conversion didn't always happen in a dramatic way from outside, but sometimes it takes place from within. And sometimes, you know, we as disciples, we're really close to Jesus. We're in the church, we're part of the faith community, but we don't really understand. And that story of those two disciples who are leaving on Easter afternoon, and they're leaving Jerusalem, and this mysterious stranger joins them, and you know, and they say, you know, he says, what are you guys talking about? And they go, oh, you must be the only person who doesn't know about this Jesus. We thought he might be the Messiah. And this stranger explains to them the scriptures. And then of course they get to where they're going, and they convince him to stay. And then suddenly, you know, they sit down for dinner, and they don't recognize it. But in the breaking of the bread, they realize, oh, this is Christ. And he disappears, and they run back to Jerusalem to tell their story. And I thought, oh, that's my story. So that's been much on my mind lately. And of course, always the 23rd Psalm stays with me. That's something that, especially in this time of trial and time when we're all struggling with the COVID-19, I take great comfort that the Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want.
And then the final question is, where do you most feel the presence of God?
Good question, because we're not in the church building right now. You know, you'd think that would be the holy place. I live next to the largest contiguous forest in Germany. It's called the Peltzer Wald, or the locals call it the Peltzer Wald to kind of jack everything up. But it's a beautiful forest. It's not like, okay, you go to Bavaria and you've got these magnificent forests with the robin's egg blue sky and the huge trees. Our forest is more like maybe a North Georgia, North Carolina type forest. We've got some pine trees and cedar trees. But when I get out there, I run every day, or I get out and hike, and I really feel the presence of Christ when I'm out there. And just in those moments of solitude, sometimes we have magnificent weather, sometimes we have terrible weather, but regardless, I still find Christ. and I'm so blessed that I can be here. I won't be here forever, but I'm thrilled that God has allowed me to be here at this time.
To be able to experience his glory and the majesty of his creation. Yeah. When will you be back in stateside, you think?
COVID, the virus is in control. I'm supposed to move this summer, and so probably, though, things will get pushed back. So probably in the fall, I'll be back in the States.
Come by sometime when you get down
Oh,
here.
absolutely. Yeah, I got to come by. I got family down there, so I need to get back down to Brunswick. And of course, Fort Stewart is not far from you. They're in Hunter Lake. Let's see, is it Hunter?
Hunter's in Savannah.
Yeah, in Savannah. So about an hour and a half, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Rob. We've had a great time talking to you.
Hey, Bill, thank you so much. Right, it's a pleasure seeing both of you guys after so long, and Bill, pleasure to meet you. So look, hope things go well. God
Hey,
bless
if anybody wants to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
you. Probably the best and easiest way, unless you got a big phone bill, is a big phone card account is my email address, and that's rcraw07@gmail.com.
Okay.
Hopefully you'll hear from some old Candler graduates. I encourage you
All right.
to maybe put this on your Facebook page. Maybe somebody will find you there, and you can rekindle some old relationships. And maybe somebody who feels the call of God on their life to be Army chaplain might reach out to you and get a few tips from you.
Well, there are so many opportunities, and like I said, I'm Army Reserve, so most of my guys are part-time. It's a great auxiliary ministry if you're in a parish. It's a wonderful opportunity to serve.
Thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you.
Blessings on you. Good to see you.
God bless.